would love to, obviously this is a Q&A, so please, there's not a bad question or a wrong question, or we'll do our best to answer those. And from a prodependent perspective today, I can also do a little teaching. If you want to know more, please just, again, type that in and we'll do our best to facilitate that. Like Cheryl said, I've been working with mostly sex pornography addicted individuals and their partners for about 15 years. And so I come from that paradigm a little bit, although prodependence applies to any addiction, drug addiction, alcoholism, any addiction where the loved one's trying to help and assist and keep their family or their loved ones close. And so it's applicable to a lot of different situations. So I will do my best to broaden that and make sure you get the answers that you're looking for. Until we have questions, I thought of a couple things that I could maybe share that would be helpful today. And Cheryl, please pipe in if you see something else I could be doing, or you have an idea as well. I want to talk a little bit, Dr. Rob does this quite often, and hopefully you guys, if you would like, you can see him on these Q&As, these webinars on the Seeking Integrity site, as well as just a plethora of really good therapists that are offering their time to share their wisdom and their understanding in the realm that they work. So when I first heard about prodependence, I was so excited, and I was happy because I had only heard, and me myself had had a lot of personal recovery from a codependent perspective, and although it was really helpful, there were elements of it that were really hurtful. And I kind of wanted to use Dr. Rob in his book. I'll hold it up so y'all can see it, Prodependence. If you don't have it, run and get it. It will really help explain prodependence if you're unfamiliar. And he, on page 75, he kind of compared and contrasted codependence, some of the codependent traits that historically we've looked at with partners and family members, as opposed to how prodependence views family members and loved ones of those suffering with addiction and chronic mental illness. And I really think it helped me understand the difference. And sometimes it seems subtle, but it's really big, I think. One of the big tenets of codependence is this sort of idea that we're replaying our trauma and our own pathology in our relationship. And that may have an impact, but it's kind of hurtful. It's hurtful for a family member or a partner or loved one to hear, because of your history, this is maybe why you chose this person or why you're in this relationship. So it's a very kind of a one down. It's not a very kind perspective. Prodependence is a very strength-based, attachment-focused perspective. So we're going to focus more on the strengths of the person who is in that relationship with somebody who's struggling, and what they bring to that relationship, and their desire to help heal or help work with or help, assist their loved one is really just their need and their desire to stay attached and connected. So I can go back and forth to this, but as we go today, I'll kind of give you the contrast between codependence and prodependence. And I'll just say really quick, one thing we talk about in codependency a lot is being enmeshed, meaning I'm so involved with that person that I don't know who I am. I lose who I am, and I don't know where I end and begin, and the other person ends and begins. And that, again, these things may cross over sometimes a little bit between codependence and prodependence, but from a prodependent perspective, we don't really talk about being enmeshed as much as being deeply involved. We're deeply involved because we love. Of course, we're going to be in there trying to figure out how to save our family and our situation. So I think we have a question.
We do. We have a great question. from Jennifer. What are your thoughts on therapeutic separation? What are some tips for carrying it out in a healthy codependent manner or way?
That's a really good question. I think therapeutic
Mm-hmm.
separations can be very, very helpful. It's important, though, that we emphasize therapeutic separation, meaning the purpose of the separation is going to be different than, say, a traditional separation, where maybe that's the first step out of the marriage and there's some legalities around that. A therapeutic separation indicates we're taking some time apart so we can get better. So we can maybe lessen the drama, the trauma,
Yeah.
the energy,
Activity.
yeah, all of that goes on in an in an addiction and in a family that's been disrupted this way, or a coupleship that's been disrupted this way. The most important thing, I think, from prodependent perspective or otherwise, is that you have good therapists that can help you navigate the separation. And what are the goals of the separation? What's interactions going to look like? How we're going to manage the kids and finances and bills, and how often do we talk, and in what form do we talk? And there's all sorts of safety and boundaries around that separation that will make it, with the help of a good therapist, maybe even both therapists, can help make that therapeutic separation beneficial to both parties. Sometimes for a partner, it's just getting out of that intense emotional, sometimes fear. Sometimes there's a lot of gaslighting and back and forth and unhealthy stuff going on. So I find that couples who do therapeutic separations, or who need that space to just kind of take a breath, recalibrate, figure out what they need, really work on themselves and their own healing, can come together oftentimes in a very healthy way afterwards. So there's not really a time frame. That's kind of up to the couple and to the therapist. As a therapist, I do a variety of time frames. It just really depends on the couple and what they need. So maybe that's helpful.
Very good. Very good. We had another person respond on the chat, and I'm just waiting to see if she wants us to discuss her chat have you discuss her chat.
Okay.
I so agree with you, Kim. Some of the partners that I've worked with just feel like they've been run over by a truck, and sometimes it's hard to figure out, where they left off and the relationship is and where their partner is. And so just getting that therapeutic opportunity to kind of define who they are themselves without having to navigate, is this me, is this the relationship, or is this him, can be very helpful to help de-escalate and not have that constant reactivity to, do I need to respond to this? I shouldn't respond to this, and having all this kind of mental energy going on in the experience.
Absolutely. Those are really
okay. She's okay with us discussing her chat. So this is really a very heartfelt question. One of our participants just discovered her husband's sexual addiction, and he admitted he has problems, but she's not sure what she should do at this point. This has been happening during their whole marriage of 17 years. She didn't even know it, and she's not sure what to do at this point. He said he needs help, but I'm not sure if I should focus on my broken soul at this time, or try to press him for answers. I'm lost, and I'm not sure what to do to help my husband or myself at this point. And just, I'm so sorry that you're having that experience. Nobody signs up for this. When you join a partnership and you make those vows, it's for life. You're making a commitment, and then to find that trust has been broken, it's devastating sometimes. So we really understand, and it's so great that you're here with us, asking for support and asking for clarity on what step to do next. Kim, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. So sorry for what you're experiencing. It's so I think that whole experience is confusing, like you're explaining, not sure where to start, not sure, how much to lean into your partner and how much to take care of yourself. And that's going to be a little bit different for every couple, but I will say, to start, you can never go wrong taking care of yourself. It's really hard to make, good sound decisions about the relationship when you've been kind of uprooted. And this kind of creates a trauma response in most partners where I sort of lose my footing a little bit. I have a hard time just breathing every day. So that's a pretty typical experience for a lot of partners. And sometimes the answers they don't come quickly. Most times they don't come quickly. I would say if you don't get a very skilled therapist, somebody who works with partners and betrayed partners, and hopefully maybe your spouse will be willing to work with a professional who works with sex addiction specifically, because the therapist can really help you navigate those beginning steps and what to do and all the confusion and all the hurt. One of the first things that I would just suggest is that you find good support for yourself. People who won't judge, who will be a vault with your information and hold that information secure, that you can trust. But every partner and addict, but every partner for sure needs good sound support system that they can turn to. You can find that in the 12-step community. Sometimes churches have them. Sometimes there's therapeutic groups. If you find a good therapist, that can be. But because you've just sort of lost that trust probably and that connection with your person, with your number one person, no one will ever give you what he can give you the same way. There's only one, committed partner, but there are people who can hold that space for your pain and help you sort of navigate the next few steps as you are grappling with what you want to do and what that looks like. So I would say, number one, you can definitely ask him questions. You can tell him what you need. But he's going to do whatever he's going to do ultimately. We know nothing, right? We know that right now. So I don't think asking questions is a bad idea, but I would probably get my support system in place a little bit before I went into great detail, because even information can be really hurtful and difficult to handle all on your own. So my suggestion would be take really good care of yourself.
Very good. She indicates that she's in a bit of a rural area and is wondering if there are any online therapists. What I can offer to you is that I'd be happy to do some research on resources for you around the country, depending upon where you are, especially if there is somebody who might be able to offer online resources in your area. One of the things I can also offer to you is while it's not therapy, it is support. Sex and relationship healing has many different groups online as support groups that are available to partners as well as to the addicts to kind of have a way to have a voice and have a community, so they don't feel so alone and so stuck with their stuff. It is hard, when you feel like you don't have somebody to reach out to. So that's one of the purposes. In fact, that's the whole purposes of sex and relationship healing, is develop an online community where people can get access to information and resources and support when they don't have the ability to do so. So thanks for being brave and bringing up the question and the curiosity about what to do next. And we're just going to support you through this. Isabel also asked a question for you, Kim. She'd like you to see if you can explain how to start encouraging her partner to take responsibility for getting his recovery started without feeling codependent and controlling.
I think you can do just that. I think you can do that in a lot of ways. You can definitely encourage him. And a lot of the encouragement comes in the form of figuring out what you need. Obviously he's got to that's part of the addiction, is not understanding his needs and wants and getting them met in unhealthy ways. So for you, I would say, figure out what you need. Like, what am I needing for him to do? If I need him to get in, it would help me feel safe for him to get in more stable recovery, maybe, more frequent visits with therapists, going to 12-step meeting, whatever kind of accountability, whatever you need. I don't think it's codependent to ask for those things. So codependent or being controlling happens inside of you. You kind of have to monitor that for yourself. Am I doing what I'm doing because it's going to help me feel safe and secure, and it's what I need or want? Or am I doing it to try and get him better? Like, I have to kind of, like, am I doing it to try and help him to see the light or to grab onto recovery? And the latter won't get you very far. It's hard.
Sure.
It is. The latter won't get you far because it's his journey. He's got to figure that out for himself. And, but for you, I think that whole feeling controlling and codependent, I think what you're trying to say is, I want to do it in a healthy way. And I don't think wanting to help and have safety in your relationship is codependent. I don't think it needs a label. The controlling piece would be just me checking my motives, making sure that my motives have to do with me and what I need, understanding I can't obviously control another person. I can invite, I can encourage, I can set boundaries, I can ask for what I need, but ultimately that our partner, your partner in this case, has to decide for himself what he's going to do. But you have every right to ask for what you need. And I don't think that's controlling. You can just take codependent out of your life.
And obviously, yeah, well, no, and obviously you have the right to ask for what you need and then take action on that as well. And sometimes that doesn't always make the addict happy, but I'm sorry, but you do have the right to take care of yourself and get that level of safety that you need. And that's one of the reasons therapists are so great for this, because they can kind of be the heavy in delivering the message about, let's be clear about what this means, and so how we can take some action on it to further the relationship. Because in some ways, the relationship between the two of you are like this separate entity that you all need to nurture and care for. And if one person is doing all the nurturing and caring, relationship doesn't really grow and thrive. So, and you have, again, just like Kim said, you have the right to take care of yourself. Amanda did share on the chat for everybody that she'd had a hard time being around her partner after last discovery. And when finding Rob's book, she finally realized that she had been trying to handle and help him with his addiction, and it's not her job. Over the time, she valued his feelings over hers, and it trashed her. It made him leave and give space to recover. I didn't want to damage him, but I hadn't been allowed to focus on my pain and safety and anger, and was at a point where both of our safety was on the line a lot.
Yeah, that is really good. Thank you for sharing that information. It's true. It's a really fine line, and everybody's different, about what's healthy for their relationship and what's not. In this case, it sounds like, that you have to recognize when am I going too far? When am I making it more about the other person, and I'm maybe sacrificing more than what's healthy for me. when I really maybe need to hone in on my own healing and, my own truth and my own needs and wants. I think that's an easy thing to get lost in, because, addiction it does feel crazy making. It's not, it's a very unstable situation to be in when I'm with an acting out addict. And it's not necessarily malicious on their part, but it is a chronic mental illness, and it has to have help. They have to get the help and get the understanding so they can learn to manage, their own healing. I want to mention really fast too, I just posted in the chat the Bloom for Women. It is an online therapeutic resource for partners who have been betrayed, specifically sex. I don't know if it's just sex only, it might be others, but you can certainly research it. It might be a good place to start. And you might have to tell them, I'm not codependent, don't call me that. because I want to save my family. But, um, they may still use that. I don't know. But I always tell people who are interested, in kind of getting out of that old codependent rut that we've been in a long time, just to educate the people who are helping you and tell them, I don't really
Absolutely.
see myself as sick. I don't see myself as ill just because I want to save my family, and just because I want to help, and just because I want to stay connected. That's not an illness.
Bingo. That's actually a healthy goal to have in a relationship. Absolutely. So we have another lady who talks about 8 years in with her sex addict who continues to try to level the field by blaming and denying. He's been diagnosed bipolar as well as an addict, and she's in a lot of pain, it sounds like. So, I just want you to know that you're not alone in this journey, and thanks so much for reaching out and talking about it.
I think that's such a big step. I don't know, you may have been, working on you for a long time along those 8 years, or this may be new, but it takes a lot of courage to even show up to something like this, and just put your heart out there and let somebody know where you are and how you're feeling. And the truth is, not every addict recovers, and not every addict recovers in the time that maybe their partner needs them to recover. And that's, it's painful. It's very painful. But everybody's journey in that healing process, we can't make anybody want to get better, unfortunately, but partners can absolutely focus in on their own healing. And it is an invitation for sure. If the addict really wants to save their marriage and stay connected, or save their relationship. But thank you for sharing that. And you're definitely not alone.
And we were just asked, what are some ways to begin setting healthy boundaries?
Ooh, the big boundary question.
Yes.
I love talking about boundaries. They're the first thing I ever heard eons ago, and I thought, I don't know what that is, but I need one of those or some of those. But the first, I always say, and we can talk more about this, over time in the upcoming webinars, but boundaries are a living, breathing entity. They're not something you're going to do one time and get it down perfectly. They aren't like that. Boundaries are something that are fluid, and throughout life and throughout relationship, they will always need to be looked at and adjusted. There's a couple of rules I'll just put right out there, and if I forget any, please pipe in, Cheryl. Boundaries are never
okay.
Boundaries are never to control another person. They are always to protect the person setting the boundaries. So I'll say that one more time. They're never about control or manipulation or coercion for another person. They're always about self-preservation, safety, for the person setting the boundary. So motives are everything when it comes to boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Boundaries are necessary in every aspect of life. They're necessary at work. They're necessary with family. They're necessary in marriage, with kids. And we aren't very good, and particularly sometimes, at teaching boundaries in our culture, unfortunately. And sometimes we actually get upset when somebody sets a boundary or tells us no, or doesn't go along with what maybe people want us to do. So boundaries, the best thing to do, I always say, if they're new to me, is to, number one, sit down. Obviously a good therapist, again, would be so helpful here, but to sit down and really parse out, what are my needs and wants? What are my rights as a person? What do I have? What do I need? Needs are non-negotiable, meaning they're things that are like, I have to have them no matter what, to be in this marriage, to be in this relationship, to be in this situation. And then what are my wants? Wants are important, but they're not necessarily deal breakers. I have some negotiating room in wants. So an example would be a need would be, I have the need for complete honesty and transparency. Most partners will say that if they have been betrayed in a relationship. And a want would be, you know, I need an individual date once a week where we can talk about some of these things. That's really important, but might not be a deal breaker if it doesn't happen. That's number one. Number two, figuring out my needs and wants, and then really starting to look at I always think starting with myself is always the best idea, because it's really easy to look out and see all the areas that are like, I don't know how to stop all this hurt from happening. But when I look at me, are there areas in my life I need to shore up my own boundaries? Like, make sure, I've said this before, so I apologize if anyone's heard it, but my kids are grown and they're adults and they're married and doing their own thing. But so one of my boundaries internally inside of me is I try not to give them unsolicited advice. You can imagine a therapist with their adult kids might want to give advice. So one of the things I do is I ask. I'll say something like, okay, are you telling me that because you're looking for feedback, or are you just wanting a place to talk? And that seems small, but for my family, that's a really big deal, because they don't like me telling them or anybody telling them what to do any more than I did at their age. So I look inward and start to really shore up my own boundaries, the things that I want to be respectful of. And this magic sort of happens. I start to really recognize, as I do that, the areas in which my boundaries are being violated, or I'm allowing other people to do things that are hurtful or harmful to me. I have telltale signs of that. Resentment's one. Like, if I start to really resent or avoid somebody, I have to ask myself, why am I doing that? That sometimes there's a boundary issue. Maybe I'm not brave enough to tell them that they're doing something that I don't like or that's hurtful to me. Anger is also, resentment, anger kind of falls under the same umbrella, but paying attention to those areas, what really upsets me? What am I really avoiding? And then I need to maybe lean in those areas and ask for what I need. So that's a very short, you have anything to add to that, Cheryl? A short description to start on boundaries?
Well, it's interesting because many of our participants have kind of have tailgate questions that tie into the boundaries question. One person has written, it's been difficult at times for me to distinguish between motives of wanting to control and needing to feel safe. Any tips on helping with the difference between those? And then another wrote, can you explain the different boundaries, ones you set for yourself to protect others versus ones you set for others to protect yourself? So two kind of different concepts around the boundaries question that I think are very frequently asked, for sure.
Absolutely. And I'm going to give all of you the same permission I give myself, which is I don't have to do boundaries perfectly. And because they're a living, fluid, breathing thing, I'm always assessing. I'm always like, because life changes, situations change. What I needed yesterday, I might not need today. And what I need today, I might not need tomorrow. So just give yourself permission to not be perfect. That's a big piece I want to just throw out there at them. Amen. So the needing to control the difference and feel safe is a very gray area. It's hard sometimes to know. My emotions are a big thing. I'm kind of checking in with my emotions, and I can kind of feel if I am trying to get somebody to see the light, or try and be the teacher or the preacher or the therapist or the whatever, I kind of have to govern that. And because boundaries are really about things like I need for safety, and then I have consequences for violation. And the consequences aren't something that I make somebody else do. They're things that I do. For instance, if I'm giving an example, if I'm a spouse of a partner who has betrayed me, or a sex addict, I might be really uncomfortable. Maybe this person flirts a lot in public, or, has a hard time staying present in public. And I'm in a situation, maybe I go out to eat and I'm in a situation where I feel unsafe in that way, or I feel like he or she's not focusing on me or the relationship, or is doing things I've asked them please not to try and focus. I might say, if that happens, I might just take an Uber home or leave that situation. So I don't slap their hand and tell them they're doing it wrong and they're going to be punished, but I do whatever I need to do to create safety for myself. So that's kind of an example.
Yeah.
Also, get people to bounce your boundaries off of. When you're in this like tumult of addiction and early setting boundaries, sometimes your mind might play with you too. You know, it'll be hard to know because there's so much going on. So get good, healthy people who know what boundaries are and say, does this sound healthy to you? You know me. Like, does this sound like a good boundary? I love getting feedback from loving and non-judgmental people who sort of understand or who have some understanding of the healing process. I hope that's helpful with that. And trust yourself a little bit. Sometimes you have to trust yourself, and you might mess up, and that's okay. You can just go back and say, sorry, that was more about me. Let me try again. So it's okay to not be perfect with that. I feel like I've been doing boundaries a really long time, and I still trip sometimes, and I'm not sure. And the new situations pop up that sort of I get befuddled, and I'm trying to figure it out. So as far as
most definitely,
as far as the difference between the internal boundaries that we set to protect others from us, and then the boundaries we set for others to protect us from others, there's 5 areas I've mentioned before. I'll just kind of throw them out so you guys can kind of think about them. But I look at physical boundaries, physical space, you know, things, physical things, like if somebody coming, am I going into somebody's space or taking things of somebody's physically that without asking? Hugs are a thing in my family. Everybody hugs everybody all the time, and it's a show of love. It's how we show love, but some people aren't huggy. I have a child who doesn't love to be hugged, and I've watched her. I try to give her permission to say no, and it's difficult in a family system without boundaries sometimes to do that. But she'll just say, I really don't want to hug. Can you know, like she'll kind of, so physical boundaries, there's spiritual boundaries, which have a lot to do with not only like religion and beliefs, but self-worth, like who you are, your intrinsic value. You know, do I pin people's intrinsic value to their behavior? Do I say, instead of focusing on the behaviors hurting me, going to somebody's character? And does that happen for me? Do people do that with me? Or sometimes it could be using religion or spirituality to control somebody's behavior or emotions.
Yes.
That happens sometimes. So that's an example. There's physical, there's emotional boundaries, meaning I need to have the right to my feelings, and I need to be able to think and feel and I need to give other people the right to think or to feel what they need to feel, not tell them what they're feeling or manipulate their feelings or blackmail or anything like that. There's thinking boundaries, meaning we all have the right to our own reality about things. And this is going to be a challenge in a relationship where there's addiction, because you're going to experience a lot of pushback. You're going to say, hey, this is what I'm experiencing or thinking. And the addict might be like, no, or the partner might say, I don't know what you're talking about. That is not. So figuring out how to let each other have our reality and still have respect for one another, thinking reality, and not telling people how to think and feel, you know, not telling them you shouldn't think, or trying to change what they think. And for some reason, sexual, of course, there's sexual boundaries. What's okay for me sexually, making sure that obviously I'm not taking advantage of anybody or manipulating or, you know, doing things that another person would be uncomfortable with, and also that I'm protecting my own sexual being and doing only what's comfortable for me and safe for me. So that's kind of, I just feel like the external ones, the ones for other people, are much easier to identify and to establish when I know myself. I find when I try to set it for others, I have a hard time if I'm not also looking inward and making sure I'm doing my best to also be respectful of the boundaries of others. Hope that makes sense.
Agreed. Somebody gave me a quick little tool years ago where they said, they look at the room that you're in and tell me what you can see. And so I listed all the things that I could see. and then had a person stand behind me and list all the things that that person could see that I couldn't see, and gave that as an example of how I may not be aware of somebody else's perception or feelings or physical experience or their realm. And so for me, it kind of gave a lot more permission to be kind of more aware that I maybe didn't understand completely, and give a little more space to gain that understanding. Not only for the person that I couldn't see their stuff, but for myself. Because, you know, in some ways I might have an edge up because I have a piece of information, or I have a knowledge, or I have an experience, or I've gotten through something already. And so it's tough, but at least it gives you kind of a concrete way of thinking about how to put yourself in somebody else's shoes without, you know, doing the blaming, shaming thing, and also check in with yourself about, are you doing exactly what you said, Kim, taking care of yourself? We have a couple other questions, or actually more like statements. We have somebody who has a husband who sounds like an addict, and she had a need with a scheduled surgery to be taken to that was not met, because they created some escalation the night before. She did have a friend go ahead and take her. And when she got home recovery, it seems like he's now joining in. It was a pretty serious surgery, and it sounds like he, struggled with it. And she's curious if the addicted have boundaries for the betrayed examples. Am I reading that right? Do the addicted have boundaries for the betrayed individuals? And she's looking for examples of that.
Oh, okay.
But I think, she literally was stating a need that she had. And I think when that need is not met, that's not a respect of a need that's been offered to a partner. So
yeah,
it's a good conversation to have.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, I'm sorry if you didn't get that need met by your spouse. It'd been nice to have him take, or her, I don't know, take.
Yeah.
Here's an interesting just piece of information. Early on, in the early stages of healing and recovery for the addict and healing for the partner, the betrayed partner, boundaries are going to be one of the most complicated areas to work in, because there's been so much violation of
most definitely,
and safety. So it's going to feel a little bit maddening for the partner to try and navigate those waters early on. As far as the addict having boundaries, yes, the addict is like any other human being, and as he or she heals and arrests the addiction and gets steady and gets a little more insight into themselves, they'll recognize they got to addiction because they had no boundaries. They did, that's one of the things that got them where they are, is they didn't have healthy ways to cope or to say no, or they didn't know how to manage their stress, or the boss at work, or wife when she's upset, or kids when they're being ruckus. Or so I actually know that an addict is doing really pretty good recovery work when he or she recognizes, gosh, I think I need a boundary here, and I want to celebrate. The partner wants to say hell no, because oftentimes it's like, if it's hard to give the addict any rights whatsoever, when they have stepped over so many of those safety barriers that you may have established. But every addict needs also boundaries. They have to learn to self-care. They have to learn what their needs and wants are and how to get those met in healthy ways. And it might be very simple. Like I recently heard an addict say, I think I need to not talk about recovery stuff after 10:30 at night, because when I get sleepy, I feel like I have less control over my emotions, and I say things that I end up hurting my wife in this case. And so he established that boundary and just asked, could we not talk about really serious recovery things after 10:30 at night, unless it's an absolute emergency. because I think it will be easier for me to engage in a healthy way in the conversation. Can we reschedule that conversation? And the partner didn't like it at first. She was like, you know, but she did. She kind of let him have that, and they've had a lot less conflict. They've been able to manage those conversations. He finally recognized something in himself, a need that he had. And so long term, it blessed the relationship. And another quick little ditty about boundaries is no one's ever going to give you permission to have boundaries, or rarely, I should say. I don't want to do absolutes, but rarely is anyone going to give you permission to have boundaries, and rarely, if ever, is anyone going to thank you for having boundaries. Most times you'll get pushback. Most time you'll get, what do you mean? Are you mad? How selfish of you. You're going to get all sorts of that, but that doesn't mean that they're wrong. It doesn't mean the boundaries that you don't need the boundary, but because we're not accustomed to it, sometimes you will not get a lot of validation. So you have to be okay inside yourself and know this is a need. It's okay that I need this ride to surgery, or that I need this time at night to not have difficult conversations, and then stick with it. So that's another thing I have to remind myself all the time. No one's going to be like, wow, Kim, you're so smart. And it wasn't for you, I wouldn't know that I was out of line. Like, no one's ever done that. I've never had that conversation. Doesn't mean my boundaries are wrong, but it's difficult. It's hard for somebody to put limits that people don't, none of us like those limits. So.
Right. Most definitely.
All right. Are we any other?
Great questions, participants. You guys have been doing great. So yeah, it's good questions.
Keep them coming. And if you want more.
Well, Kim, do you have any? Yes.
If you have any clarification or anything that we talked about, just type it in and we'll do our best. I'll do my best for sure. So for a minute, until something pops up, I'll go back to these codependent versus prodependent traits that Dr. Rob has identified that I just love, because many of us have heard these codependent words for like ever, and they're pretty pop culture too. You'll hear them used really loosely on the internet, on TV. I see it all the time. I'm like, do we really even know what that means? So I talked about enmeshed and kind of switching that to a strength-based perspective of, instead of I'm sickly enmeshed, maybe I'm deeply involved, and I might be involved more than I need to be, or I might be involved in an unhealthy way for me or the other person, but we don't have to pathologize it. We just have to maybe have a boundary about it. The next one is we talk about enabling. Such an enabler, so codependent. She or he enables everybody. How often have we heard that kind of word? And I think what we mean is that maybe somebody lets people get away with, or actually helps somebody in their unhealthy patterns or behaviors. And sometimes we may help or support somebody in unhealthy ways. We can do it too much, or at the wrong time, or with the wrong person. But Dr. Rob, from the prodependent perspective, says this is support. Sometimes we show up to support somebody, we just might not do it in the healthiest way. So instead of putting the label, wearing the dunce hat of enabling, let's just look at it like, what's the healthiest way for me to support? Maybe I am doing things for somebody that they really need to learn to develop skills on their own. We don't have to say I'm an enabling nightmare. We can just say I maybe need to let go in that way and let that person grow up a little bit. There's another way to look at it. So there's another one.
Yeah. Well, we've got a couple of questions that just came in, or curiosities. Let's see here. It looks like Summer's commenting that her sex addict is avoidant. It says his boundary is leaving abruptly when confronted and conversation gets too honest. It feels like abuse to her. That makes sense.
Well, I would say unless it's a really big safety issue, that's probably not a boundary. And remember, boundaries are really rough in these stages. They're difficult, and addicts have just as rough of a time setting them as partners. I really believe there's a difference between feeling unsafe and feeling uncomfortable. So sometimes conversations are painful. They're difficult. They're hard to sit in. They're hard to hear. So in my mind, the boundary would be, it would look a little bit different. If I was, in this case, the addict, I might say to the partner here, so I have a low threshold when things get really emotional. I want to react. I want to overreact. And I have a lot of shame, and I start hating myself, or I start feeling bad, and then I want to lash out. So what I need to do is leave conversations when A, B, or C happens. But what I will do is promise to come back to the conversation when my head's screwed on right. So that would be a boundary, not, hey, just when you talk about that, I'm out. That's not a boundary. That's a reaction.
Right.
And I'm not trying to hammer whoever this person is. It seems like a subtle difference, but it's a huge difference. So he may need to walk away from certain conversations because it's going to be unproductive and he loses his footing. But then he needs to say that. He has to take ownership of that. I have a hard time when the conversation does this, because here's where I go. And I always encourage people, and I try and use this. The story I have in my head when this goes on is, I'm a bad person and you hate me, or whatever. So we have to own what's going on in here. And I can't be there for you when I'm got that going on in my head. I can't show up in the way that I need to. So that probably needs to be tweaked a little bit and worked on. It sounds like this person's really uncomfortable with difficult conversations, and it'd be really good for he or she just to own that. So I want to stay and talk to you, but I'm having a hard time.
Very good.
Yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Great suggestion. Isabel's asking, do you have any advice for setting up a good environment for communication each day? How to start a conversation without it feeling too overly serious or causing my husband to get defensive? Great question.
It's a great question. You can't cause him to get defensive. It's that, we all have our own defense, like our own defense mechanisms inside of ourselves. So that's not your fault. We can do things and say things that we know our buttons, right? Like, I know after 30 some odd years with the man I'm married to, I know his buttons pretty good. I know which ones I can push. So we have to be cautious of that. If you're in a situation where you're trying to heal from betrayal, or you're trying to work, within a relationship that's healing from some sort of addiction, I like to differentiate. I like there to be communication, different types of communication. Identify what you need. So if you need a conversation about recovery, for instance, make sure that both parties know that that's what this is about, and that we've agreed to a mutual time and an amount of time. So for the next 30 minutes, can we have a conversation about A, B, and C? And if you ask and you set that up and you're proactive about it, it will go better. Communication just will. I also like couples to have times when they will just check in, especially in the healing process with couples. I think a check-in in morning and night is really good. Not, reporting like a child to a parent, not like that, but stating, when I wake up in the morning, this is how I'm feeling. This is what's going on for me, physically, emotionally, spiritually, relationally. This is where I am. And then before we go to bed at night, this is where I am. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't turn into a 30, 40 hour, 2-3 hour conversation. It has boundaries around it. You will find that an addict has a very low threshold for this early on, very low threshold for heavy emotion and these painful conversations. So the more you can bracket them and be very specific and intentional about them, the better they'll go. And set time limits. Most people don't do that, but do it. Even if you're mid-sentence, set a timer and come back to it. And if somebody needs to walk away and take a time out, allow that. That's what adults do. Just promise the person that you'll come back. Just commit to come back to the conversation, because what that communicates is, I do care enough about you to come back to the conversation. Some ideas.
Most definitely. And it is like learning. I don't know if anybody ever took instrument lessons or piano lessons are a great example. You can't be a concert pianist when you sit down for the first time, and relationships are much the same way. And sometimes just picking those tiny topics to start your day or close your day that are not going to be emotionally evocative are really good ways to kind of practice dipping your toe in the pool of just having candid conversations about how you might experience something or what happened in your day or how you feel about something that doesn't have anything that can overtly push your buttons or somebody else's buttons. So it's just a nice way to practice. And with more practice, you get better at it because then you're working toward becoming that concert pianist in your relationship, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So the earlier question, the individual's indicating that apparently her partner leaves for hours or days and plays the victim, which is kind of taking your marbles and going home. And again, that's probably not a boundary. That's about trying to control what does or doesn't happen. Having a conversation about that without having, issues brought up other than we need to come up with a way to talk about this might be helpful.
Yeah, and this goes back to your needs and wants, to say, look, I know these conversations are difficult. Validate that. I know that I'm not always perfect at how I say it, what I say, but they are necessary. If you're in the marriage and you want to heal it, we have to find a space and a place. And you walking away for hours at a time without it, that doesn't feel like a boundary to me. That feels like control for me. That's what it feels like. So I would problem solve. What can we do differently? Can we do it different? How long can you sit in a conversation? And how long are you willing to do that with me? And are you willing to try? Sometimes couples get into the talking over each other and the accusing and all that. So a good therapist too can help you kind of navigate that. Like, what's our thing?
Amen.
How do we do this? I love setting up what I call, this isn't my idea. I got it somewhere. I can't remember where I got it, but like a fair fighting rules to disagreements or to difficult conversations, where we will sit down and as a therapist, I'll talk to the couple and say, what are your hot buttons here? And so we'll avoid using language about divorce. We will avoid fighting in front of the kids. We'll avoid rushing out of the room and not committing to coming back. We'll avoid verbal abuse, language, yelling at each other, any sort of physical outburst. So we set up these rules and they commit to both do that. And they both commit to those time limits and what that will look like. And also when they take a time out, they commit to come back to the conversation if they get elevated or dysregulated and they can't stay in it. So I would encourage you to keep trying, keep talking. And instead of telling him or her what they're doing wrong, tell them what that's like for you. When you get up and leave for hours at a time, the message that I get is I don't matter and this conversation doesn't matter. And that could be my message, but I need this to change. This doesn't feel good to me. And this doesn't feel productive to me. And it doesn't help me to feel safe and cared about, because some of these things are hard. And if you're the partner, you're dealing with a whole bunch of consequences, negative consequences from the addiction. And the addict has to learn how to stand in that wind. And that's part of her recovery too. We have a little.
We have a question. Is it? We have a little delay. Yes. Is it common in your work, Kim, and experience for a spouse to still want to work through a marriage with an addict who's had a child porn history? It's a tough question.
Gosh, yeah, and I can only speak from my experience. Child pornography would sometimes it'd be a little bit different sort of treatment than what I offer, that I have a lot of experience with. But yes, I have seen partners want to work through that, and I have seen couples survive that, and it takes obviously a lot of work and a whole different sort of category of boundaries and transparency. And there's a lot of considerations too. how serious that behavior is, and are there children in the home? With the behavior, is it risky to anybody else? There's a lot of things that would have to be considered. But I think most partners who are in relationship with somebody who, whatever the behavior is, sometimes you can't stay. Sometimes it's a deal breaker.
Uh-oh.
Are you there? Am I frozen?
You were for a moment, yes.
Okay. Sorry about that.
You're going now. Oops, that's me.
Yeah, you're frozen. I can hear you, but
That's just a
maybe everybody can chat in if they can see and hear me still. Make sure we're still live here. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. So it's a very carefully considered situation. That child pornography, it might be that somebody, an addict, ran into child pornography as they were looking at other things, and it's not overly intentional. And then it might be an indicator of an arousal template that's set for children, which would be so there's a lot of considerations of safety and recovery there. I always tell partners, oh, I'm the host now. Okay. We'll see if Cheryl gets back.
There we go. Sorry.
So I always tell that can be a really scary and uncertain thing to happen. Give yourself time if you are in that situation. Give yourself time to learn and for him to figure out what the risk factors are for himself or herself and the partner and family. And so that's a really complicated question. I don't feel like I maybe answered that well, but it's not a cut and dry thing. It's a really individualized thing.
Most definitely. Let's see if we're missing anybody right now. How do you suggest the addict addressing his issues of infidelity and sex porn addiction that have turned his family upside down into their adult children? How do you suggest the addict? Yeah. This may or may not be a conversation for them.
You want to ask your adult children. They're adults. How much do they want to know and need to know? There's been some studies back in the day. Cheryl, you'll probably remember this. 20, 30 years ago, the thinking was that that the addict discloses most things to the children age appropriate, either younger children or adult children. There's a study done and most kids decided, that TMI, I didn't want to know all that. I don't want to know about my parents' sex life. I don't want to know about what my dad's doing or mom. And adult children can be similar. So they're adults. I would have a good boundary about that. And I would ask them, maybe it would be something like, your dad and I, or maybe whoever the addict is might say, I'm having some struggles in my life. It's causing some disruptions. And I don't know how much you guys want to know, but I'm willing to be open if you do need to know more. And really, adults should be able to decide for themselves how much they want to know, I would say. Mm-hmm. And kids really need to know pretty much not much. They can know mom and daddy are having a hard time, and dad made, or mom or whoever's made some bad choices, and we're working through it. And if if you need something from us, you come and tell us, and just, whatever. So they don't really want to know. They're not prepared for that. That's TMI for most kids.
Right. One of my nieces was given an affirmation book for kids. And her mom and dad were having an argument one day, and she announced that when my mom and dad fight, it's not my responsibility. And it was one of the affirmations in the book. And so her parents then looked at each other and said, well, we need to take this to the other room. And that was such a great concrete example for me in my relationships around my kids when we were struggling. My partner and I were struggling with this issue, how to manage our distress so it didn't have to spill out onto the kids. That clearly it was within our container and realm that we needed to take care of it. Got a couple other questions. Husband of 34 years has betrayed her and lied to her face around finances, and that's really an important thing to be able to have frank discussions about. He's a workaholic, and she just realized that 6 years ago in ACA. She's a recovering alcoholic, having recently realized that she has serious PTSD, and she doesn't feel much in the way of support. Sober 24 years and just moved a year and a half ago. And I would just have to say, there is so much available to you through sex and relationship healing, Women in Bloom, in the rooms. I mean, there is so much available online, and the value of having a therapist that you can just sit down and kind of spill your heart to is worth its weight in gold. You know, if you can find somebody locally, find somebody who can do work with you online if you have a difficult time getting to your area. I mean, what are your thoughts about that, Kim?
Yeah, I think you're right on. And what I'm hearing is there's financial infidelity in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Which is, you know, sometimes we hear sexual infidelity and all that, and we don't put this up there, but that can be really, really painful. It can be really painful. It's just another form of being dishonest in the relationship, and not letting the partner in, not sharing all of what I'm thinking and feeling with the partner. So you'll experience its own level of betrayal, its own level of distrust, and, you know, emotional pain, and it can be traumatic as well, because that speaks to our stability and our, you know, our connection and our trust in each other and our common goals. And sometimes financial goes along with every other addiction, almost always, I would say. There's a financial aspect to that, but finances alone can be its own process addiction.
Right.
Or behavioral addiction for, you know, it's another thing that can go awry, you know, that somebody can use in an unhealthy way. So I agree with Cheryl. Get support. Get a good therapist that can help you navigate the pain, and maybe full disclosure if you haven't had that. So, you know, the slate can be cleaned. We can know all of that information, and so we can move forward. And it sounds like the partner's going to need to figure herself out too. Like, why do I do this, and what purpose does it serve for me? What's the payoff for me? Am I avoiding? You know, what pain am I avoiding? So, absolutely. And go ahead. Sorry.
And I know we're at time, but we have one more question that I did not see, and I just drilled down to. She says her partner's in good recovery, but she's finding triggers are getting harder. It was easier when it was all crap, and now things are better. It's really throws me into trauma. Help. So it sounds like this is something that's kind of rattling her cage, even though they've been building a good foundation and good recovery process, that they've been negotiating through some of the difficult things. But there's still those stepping stones.
Yes, and in my experience, sometimes when the crisis stage has kind of settled down, the betrayed partner actually has a place to feel, and some of that stuff kind of comes up. The triggers do get a little more intense because he or she finally has a safe place, a safer place than they've had to, and they kind of let down their emotions, and they get to part of their grieving process that they maybe couldn't do in the crisis because they were just trying to hold, you know, poke fingers to hold the water out, fingers in the holes of the boat, you know. And so being self-aware about that, like, we're actually doing better, but my triggers are getting bigger, could speak to the fact that you're doing better. So you would go right to the same tools that you have used to deal with whatever other triggers that you've dealt with in your process of healing, and you would amp those. You would just put those in place in even greater ways, more support, more balance, more daily planning, more self-care, so that you can manage those. But in a weird kind of way, it's kind of an indicator. It really is an indicator that your relationship's becoming a safer place that you can feel.
Absolutely.
Kind of turn that and understand this isn't necessarily a bad thing. I'm finally able to start grieving.
Well, you got a good job as always, Kim. Woohoo! If we could figure out a way to make Zoom do the wave, we'd give you one, sister. I want to thank you for all joining us today and taking the time. Please do take advantage of sexandrelationshiphealing.com. There's a lot to offer. There's many other resources out there. It's not the only one, but SRH offers webinars, podcasts, blogs, support groups, all on the house. There's no cost to any of these things, and amazing clinicians like Kim. I mean, we're so blessed to have Kim and Kristen Minto and some of the speakers that are speaking with Rob Sue Johnson and Stan Tatkin, and people who are really leaders in the field talking about relationships in this forum. So we're really grateful to have it as an opportunity for you all to reach out to. So feel free to utilize it and spread the word. So Kim, thanks again. I'm looking forward to seeing you next week in Santa Fe.
Yes, I'll be there.
And yes, exactly. And
I will be
so Kim.
I will be back on the 16th. So
very good.
All of you who are here, please join me again. And think, if you have questions that come up between now and then, or ones you wanted to ask today that you didn't, please bring them with you. We'll do our darndest to help out.
Absolutely. And for those interested in resources, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself. I'm Cheryl at seekingintegrity.com. You're more than welcome to do so, and I'll be happy to help you with any resources that I can find. We work nationally with folks and network with people, amazing folks like Kim. And so usually somewhere I can find somebody for whoever has the need in one shape, fashion, or form. So we do our best. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. Thanks, Kim.
Bye.
Bye.